Yogananda says, entitling this work, The Second Coming of Christ, I am not referring to a literal return of Jesus to earth. He came 2,000 years ago and, after imparting a universal path to God's kingdom, was crucified and resurrected. His reappearance to the masses now is not necessary for the fulfillment of his teachings. What is necessary is for the cosmic wisdom and divine perception of Jesus to speak again through each one's own experience and understanding of the infinite Christ consciousness that was incarnate in Jesus. That will be his true second coming. There is a distinguishing difference of meaning between Jesus and Christ. His given name was Jesus. His honorific title was Christ. In his little human body, called Jesus, was born the vast Christ consciousness, the omniscient intelligence of God, omnipresent in every part and particle of creation. The consciousness is the only begotten Son of God, so designated because it is the sole perfect reflection in creation of transcendental absolute Spirit, or God. A small cup cannot hold an ocean within itself. Likewise, the cup of human consciousness, limited by the physical and mental instrumentalities of material perceptions, cannot grasp the universal Christ consciousness, no matter how desirous one may be of doing so. By the definite science of meditation, known for millenniums to the yogis and sages of India and to Jesus, any seeker of God can enlarge the caliber of his consciousness to omniscience, to receive within himself the universal intelligence of God. What Jesus gave, as chronicled in the New Testament of the Bible, very few people understand. They just read what he said and quote it. And because it is written in the biblical scripture, they believe it blindly, with little effort to realize the wisdom therein through personal experience. Realization is to attune one's consciousness with Christ. Then the right comprehension will come. When persons try to deduce the meaning of Jesus' words by intellectual analysis alone, or from the perspective of a specific dogma, they inevitably distort his sayings to suit their purpose, however well-intentioned, or to comfortably accommodate their level of understanding. Christ's wisdom has to be grasped by communion, not by rationalization. So, this is going to ruin Santa Claus. Last night, Jody and I went to see Polar Express, and I was excited. I'd never seen it, and I knew it would be a children's movie, but I wasn't sure what it would be all about. And there were elements about it that were okay, that were good. But as I've grown in the path, there's a certain starkness in my consciousness. It's a little bit my personality, too. What the hell? I mean, we've sold this story to the world that's just crazy. Ridiculous, I mean, I guess the underlying moral is, kids, you got to be nice, not naughty, so that come this day, you're going to get some gifts. I bet you that works for about 3 hours when they're falling asleep Christmas Eve. Because if in April you go, kids, if you keep acting that way, you ain't getting no gifts from Santa Claus. Yeah, right. Who has the guts at Christmas to go, there's no gifts this year, I guess, you were a jerk. I mean, it's not going to work, right? Kids will be traumatized. 20 years later, they'll be in therapy going like, I don't know why she didn't buy me anything. Like, the whole thing is so fraught with ridiculousness. But I understand the magic of it. Now, at the end, the big moral was when this poor kid who's gone up to the North Pole, and why on God's earth did they put it at this most uninhabitable place? Probably because nobody could go up there and check if it actually exists. Anybody go like, well, how do they get all the materials up there? I heard like a grapefruit is like $50 because it takes a week to ship it up there. The kids, even the kids who had consciousness and were like, seriously? And this poor kid, that's sort of what they're betraying, what they're portraying. They're portraying this poor kid who's like trying so hard to believe in Santa. You know, and at the end, I don't know if it's the conductor or Santa goes, you know, the secret lies in your heart. And my version was, the secret to Christmas is a lie in your heart. And that cracked me up, because I thought, how funny that would be. But, you know, that's so cruel in a way. Like, this kid's trying so hard to believe in something that's not true. And I think that that does happen for a lot of kids. You know, it's like we think they're so stupid that they can't figure it out. And this is a big cultural problem. And it, you know, it translates later in life where we don't want to disappoint people by speaking the truth. And I know that there was another movie made, this is about one of the Asian cultures. And it's about the grandma has cancer. But they don't want to tell her because they don't want to ruin the end of her life. So everyone's coming to see her, and it's like they're telling her that, oh, we're just here to celebrate your life, but really they're kind of getting ready for her to die. It's another aspect of culture, as cultures that go, we can't give the truth to people because they can't handle it. So we're going to present some sort of a lie, at which point the soul has to be going like, I don't know why, I don't feel right about this. And that's really what this kid is sort of contending with, I think. The other problem with the movie is that the story is really very thin. There's really no story. Like, what makes a story interesting is we want to find out what's going to happen. And this story seems to be predicated on the thought of like, well, here's a kid who's got a mysterious train that's taking him up to the North Pole, and like, is he going to find out for sure that Santa Claus exists? I mean, think about it. I think the answer is yes. That's the story to the movie. So it's not all that intriguing, you know, and then there's all sorts of little kind of creepy things that they throw in there to try to make it interesting. What's wrong with the real story of Christ? I mean, if you really understood and meditated on the story of Christ and how compelling it is, I mean, let me explain it to you from this perspective, right? First of all, it's an outer representation of the experience a human soul goes through when they're trying to reach this place that he's talking about. It is not easy, and it's fraught with significant obstacles. So why did it happen at the time of history that it happened? Well, we know that, you know, at some point in history, the Jews who were enslaved to the Egyptians were freed and crossed over into the desert and eventually ended up in Israel, known as the Promised Land. But here we are, we wake up, I don't know how many hundreds of years later, Moses is long gone, and there's a scripture and there's this intense sort of Jewish faith. They are the chosen people because they want God, and yet their land is dominated by the Romans. Now, when you think of Roman culture, generally you think of indulgence. You think of sort of power. We want as much land as we can. We're going to try to take over the world. That was what the Roman Empire seemed to want to do. And they were of all people, they got the closest, I think. They had countries, much of the world, they dominated. And they were all about, you know, like, first of all, it's all about what we want to do, what gives us a thrill. And lugubrious indulgences, physical pleasure, hedonism. And yet there's this aspect, this one place of Israel where they're screaming out for truth and love, and the Messiah is going to come and liberate us. The thought is that it's going to somehow arrive and magically abolish the Roman rule and let us have our land. But the reality is not that. So here's this vision, you know, think about it from a story perspective. We're really hoping for this guy to show up, and he's going to somehow elicit these armies and overtake this Roman Empire. We're going to get to have our spot. So we don't have to do anything, really. That's the number one problem with that consciousness. The consciousness of the Pharisees, the consciousness of the religious authorities, which we all have in us as a mind, because if we didn't have it, this Church of Christ would be overwhelmed with people going like, yes. But everyone's going like, well, I don't know, Jesus is so weird, and you guys are so weird, you're always so intense, and it's so heavy, and you got to look at everything, and it never ends, and why do I have to forgive all these jerks, and why can't I just like let them go? And because none of that changes you, really. And the other good stuff does. But humbly we go, I have that same part that battles against this path. So you look at the story as it happened, and you go, yeah, many of the Jews at the time hated Jesus. They were like, this is blasphemous, this isn't it. And you will say that. I don't care if you're a student, if you're self-realized or what. There will be times where you go, I don't know if this is it. Because that's part of the consciousness that is very slow to fade away. It's self-preserving, it's prideful, it wants to do what it wants to do. It wants to discover the route to self-realization that doesn't require humility, doesn't require yourself to be taught, doesn't require yourself to have to face the difficult truths. I mean, don't all kids have that, or don't you have that dread that all kids at some point you're going to have to go like, yeah, Santa Claus is a myth. And so, like, that's kind of devastating for some kids. Because something about it really, that fantasy gave them something. And inevitably you're going to have to either be the one or they're going to find out. And then they're going to go like, wow, I was duped all those years. Why don't we tell them the truth? I think it's fine if you want to give presents once a year. I think the tradition is nice. I mean, we had it in my family, even though my family was Jewish. Part of my family was Protestant, and my mom's aunt went out of her way to make it, and it was like really exciting. And we used to draw Christmas trees, and we did all that stuff, but we weren't taught Santa Claus was the one that was bringing it. So in that sense, you know, I didn't have that kind of disappointment. But as, you know, think about this next piece. This is the sort of one of the coolest things, is that, okay, so God is sending the Messiah. That was the scripture. It said he's sending the Messiah. The Messiah comes, and he's this humble, kind of, you know, non-showy person who speaks in a way that's kind of mind-blowing. But he's not all, here I am to, you know, get rid of the Roman Empire. He's like, I'm here to show you the liberation is an internal experience. Now, it would be a sort of an interesting story if everyone was like, oh my God, that's so cool. All right, what do we need to do? But we like the conflict in the story because the resolution of it is so satisfying. So we have this whole sector that goes, no, you're not it. Even though he's raising people from the dead, and he's healing people who are crippled, and he's making bread appear out of nowhere, they're still going like, you're not it. And then they even set up some scenes where there's confrontation between the two. They come to him and say, great teacher, you know, what about this? And he's like, yeah, right, stop kissing up to me. You're trying to trap me. So that would be a cool scene, you know? So what's that internally, right? That's internally where we want the Christ in us to prove itself as though we're above it. It's like, well, if you are the Christ, you know, the Christ would be like, yeah, you know what, I'll check you later. This is not how it works. And it just withdraws, and you can't do anything about it. You don't have control to pull it out of the mire and go, hey, wait, sorry. You know, you got to retreat and go like, somebody's got to help you go, man, I really missed the boat on that one. I was a jerk there. And, you know, the Christ is forgiving, but also it's got to teach us somehow. And so Jesus would withdraw from those conversations. He ends up getting crucified. So you wouldn't think that would be the happy ending. Right? This is, again, what makes the story so fascinating. It's like, let's say you didn't know what happened. And you're like, okay, well, this guy's a real thing. So at some point at the last minute, there's going to be some intervention like the movies always have. You know, they're like in the execution room, and it's like they finally get the call from the governor going like, no, we made a mistake. There's a sense of relief because the innocent guy doesn't die. But in fact, that doesn't happen. So you're on the edge of your seat going like, wait a minute, does that mean the Christ in me has to die? This is really intriguing. And then 2 days later, or 3 according to the scripture, but he died on Friday, he raised up on Sunday, he resurrects. And you learn later as you live the path that something has to really die in order that something else may come alive. So it's like later on the story becomes even huger because you get to go through it. And you go like, how in the world did somebody, you know, coordinate that on the material plane? Well, then you go, what do I know? I clearly cannot orchestrate a frickin' story like that. Okay, maybe you need to learn how to tell the story. because there are certain people who tell stories really well, and you're on the edge of your seat, and there's others that they don't put the zest in it. They don't know how to, sort of move it along and create tension and then relief and tension and relief and then crescendo and then, the denouement, as they say. Like there's a little period after the climax where you want to sort of be with people and just like chill out. We don't want to have the final scene and then the credits. So there is something to be said about learning how to tell the Christmas story. When you experience it, and you're in the middle of it and you haven't hit some sort of climax or some sort of breakthrough or some sort of resolution, then it's really, really interesting. You want to know what's going to happen. And I find the story of Christ and the discovery of Christ, as mirrored or represented by the outer story, to be perfect. It's the perfect way to get there. Like for us to watch it happen the way we did, because there's a lot of symbolism. There's a lot of room for you to have your own personal experience in it. What Yogananda is saying, people read the scripture and they go like, oh yes, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So you should mourn. It's like, what if somebody goes like, I don't really know what that means? Or, a harder one. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit, for they shall see God. What does poor in spirit mean? I thought we're not supposed to be poor. Well, are we supposed to be poor? Like, should we be rich? Well, rich sounds like the rich guy didn't do too well, so I don't understand it. Yeah. But people are walking around going, well, let's say they got no money, so they walk by some little guy Santa ringing a bell going like, can you give me money? Oh, blessed are the poor, for they shall see God. Ciao. Like this misuse of Scripture to justify whatever it is you believe. That's what he's saying. I mean, if it's weird, I'm not going to be a fan of it. Sometimes people use it and it's tangentially sort of correct, and that's fine. But do you hunger for the wisdom of truth? Hey, by the way, let's put out a plate of cookies for Santa, even though he's already jumbo. Why don't we give him more cookies? And you ever thought if he came down one chimney, how disgusting his outfit would look like? Like, does anybody stop and go, wait a minute, the chimney is, and then he's jumbo, and then he's got to go through all of them, and yet at the end he still looks pretty good. So, I want to be the guy who tells a story to the kids like that. Kids, hey, gather around. I want to just give you some insights. First of all, cookies and fat people, not sure it's the way to go. That's just my sense of humor, I just cracks myself up. Okay. The true story of Christ is perfect. It's such a great story. To watch it played out and go like, the whole Roman Empire represents an aspect of myself that wants to just have this great physical life. I want to have as much sex as I can. I want to have as much food as I want. I want to be able to eat all the desserts. I want to be able to sleep as long as I want and take super hot baths and have people massage my flesh. And that's the Roman Empire that's trying to take over the world. And yet somewhere, what will not succumb to it is the chosen people going like, God, God. It's like Horton Hears a Who. Remember that one? Someone says, a little voice going like, he's here, whatever the heck the thing was saying. That will not go away. And it calls forth the presence of Christ. It's like the part of you that goes like, I don't think it's all about pleasure. And that's correct. So there's part of you that's, no, I'm not going to give in to that. So you got a conflict here. This part that's trying to take over the world, and a little part's going like, no, we're not going to give in. Great. You relate to it, and then you call forth the Christ, and it shows up, and how disappointing. It's this scrawny guy who's a carpenter, he's like, what? You mean Joseph's son? Yeah, it is a little disappointing compared to what you maybe have thought it would be. If you start to have the experience of the presence of Christ, you might be disappointed. But if you were to go like, okay, maybe my concept was a little bit off, so let me sit here and try to be with the Christ and see what happens. And the clarity of the truth and the simplicity and the calmness of the wisdom and the lack of, pressure. It's not like admonishing you, it's teaching you. It's loving you. And if you can relax and experience that, then there's this magnitude of hope and, like if I can just really be in tune with that, then what happens? Well, if you follow the story, then Christ gets crucified. So maybe you're like, well, I don't know if this is a good idea. But we got to keep going. We got to follow through to the resurrection, because that Christ in you is encouraging the death of an aspect of yourself that is in the way. And I just think it's so amazing that, God was like, well, it's going to look like it's going well, and then all of a sudden it's going to go really bad. So you're going to get killed. Like to set that up is just so amazing and so brilliant. Anyways, I might be getting redundant now. I just love it. I really do love it. And the more you live it, the more you go, it's perfect. There's nothing I need to change. I don't have to get rid of this piece. I don't have to get rid of that expression. It's just everything works. But the world is not going to see it that way until they surrender to the process of internal investigation through meditation. That's what Yogananda is always saying. It's like this really cool thing that we've known about for thousands of years, and you got to get really good at it. And it takes a long time. So, the stuff that we do en route to that, where we have to, examine where we're holding anger and where we're holding righteousness and where we're being fearful and where we're being lazy and where we're being escapism and all that. Those things all have to be sort of like relinquished to the back room so we can be right at the forefront and available for the Christ.